Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third session for today at the CUNY Accessibility Conference. My name is Kevin Korber. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a member of the Accessibility Conference Committee. This session is entitled Refocusing the View, Integrating Disability as Identity in Virtual Programming Development. For those of you who are returning, and as well as some of you who are attending their first session today, just like to go over some of the house rules. For the duration of the presentation, your cameras will be off and your microphones will be muted. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, please place them in the chat in Zoom. We will answer them in the order that they are received, time permitting. We do have captioning, we do have live captions available and sign language interpreters available. They will be listed on the gallery presenters. So if you find anybody labeled ASL interpreter, you can pin them for that. If you have any concerns or technical difficulties, or if you wish to speak with ask a question with your microphone on or with your camera on, please make the request in the chat and one of the committee members will assist you. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our presenters today from California State University in Channel Islands, Disability Accommodation Support Services Office, Bonnie Landau and Michelle Resnick. Take it away.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us. As we get going, I'm Michelle Resnick, by the way. I'm here with my colleague, Bonnie Landau. I'm the Director of Disability Accommodations and Support Services, and Bonnie serves as our Transition and Retention Counselor. So the program that we're going to describe and discuss today was really born out of our initial experiences here on campus, because we were called to a lot of different departments to talk about disability and really, the what to do and what not to do with accommodations. And it became apparent that there needed to be some context for what we were discussing, that a lot of people were really not familiar with the social justice and civil rights movements that really came and caused us to even have the conversation. So before we get going, I want to just pause and recognize that it wasn't always a given that disability would be considered when discussing equity, inclusion, accommodation. And so the slide right now talks about accessibility is getting in the building, diversity is getting invited, inclusion is having a voice at the table, and belonging is having your voice heard at the table. So again, this wasn't necessarily a given. So in 1973, the Nixon administration passed the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And I want to read an important quote. It says, "No otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall solely on the basis of his handicap be excluded from the participation in or be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." This was huge. It was huge because it was the first piece of legislation that affirmed the rights of people with disabilities, who happen to be the largest minority group in the country. And you'll note that there are a lot of pictures of activists with disabilities under that quote. We have people that are wheelchair users holding signs saying, "We shall overcome." Pictures of the Capitol crawl, which was when people who were wheelchairs users threw their wheelchairs down and pulled themselves up onto the Capitol building to bring some attention to the whole idea of disability. So there was a problem with this. The Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was the lead agency responsible for implementing the changes, and the secretary never signed the regs. So they sat and they sat and they never became law. But then finally, after 4 years of waiting, the American Coalitions of Citizens with Disabilities decided to take to the streets and fight for the signing of 504. And across the country, protests broke out. People with disabilities and their allies, they were tired of waiting. None of these protests lasted very long. except for the protest at the Federal Building in San Francisco, where a group of 150 disabled citizens took over the building for 26 days. And it's the longest peaceful takeover of a government building in our history. And in that moment, a civil rights movement was created, the disability civil rights movement. And so who were their supporters? Politicians, churches, unions. But in that area in particular, the Black Panthers were running food kitchens for all of people who needed food in the area, the people who were food insecure. So the Black Panthers were bringing food to the building. And the Rainbow Brigade were a group of gay men who were protecting the gay men who were going out to clubs in the area. And they were providing protection for the building and for the protesters. And there were members of the Asian community, the Jewish community. I mean, even the Van Jefferson airplane showed up, right? So anyone who understood discrimination stood up with this group. And because they got national news coverage, a hearing was finally scheduled in Washington, D.C. And while some of the protesters stayed in the Federal Building, others flew to Washington, D.C. And when they got there, they couldn't get up the steps. So the machinists union showed up with a U-Haul truck that had a lift on the back so wheelchair users could be transported and lifted to the front door. And finally, the 504 regs were signed. And this was one of the leaders of the movement. This is a picture of Judy Heumann. And she said, through the sit-in, we turned ourselves from being oppressed individuals into being empowered people. We demonstrated to the entire nation that disabled people could take control over our own lives and take leadership in the struggle for equality. You see, while the other civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s were going on, people with disabilities were participating and they learned. And with their allies, they were able to give birth to this movement that now it seems common that we worry. We talk about disabilities, we talk about accommodation fairly commonly, but that wasn't always the case. So while this is all going on, and this is a picture of wheelchair users in front of a Greyhound bus with signs. And in 1977, a court ruled that all a bus driver had to do was stop and open a door for a person in a wheelchair, and that would avoid any discriminatory claim. And so the cry started, we can't even get to the back of the bus. One day in July of 1978, a bus driver in Denver stopped to pick up riders. But before he could continue on his route, people in wheelchairs rolled in front of his vehicle. And minutes later, another bus traveling on the same route pulled up behind him, and more people in wheelchairs stationed themselves behind the second bus. Both buses were unable to move, and the traffic in the heart of downtown Denver came to a standstill. And buses spent the next 24 hours locked in place while the protesters chanted, "We will ride," a slogan that changed American history and a lot of public transportation. So I know there's still a lot of work to be done in the New York City public transportation system. But if you travel to other places, you'd know that, you know what, we do have access in a way that is not there in other places. So this movement eventually gives birth to the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the picture here is a picture of President Bush signing the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, what's so interesting about the ADA was that it was originally called the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1988. It took 2 years to sign. What's really important here also to note is that it guarantees individuals with disabilities will have the same opportunities as those without disabilities. One of the big differences between the ADA and the Rehab Act is the Rehab Act was specific to organizations receiving federal funds. This just essentially helps now broaden that and create a protected class of citizens. So now that we have the ADA, now what? Well, now that we have the ADA, we have this whole group of people who were raised mainstream, right? So our students today were much more likely to either be or have students with disabilities in their classrooms growing up. So that wasn't the case for me, right? I can tell you that when I was coming up the ranks, that students with disabilities, even the students in my neighborhood, took a separate bus to school and went to a separate classroom. And the expectations that they had for life were a little bit different. And so we have been able slowly over time to begin normalizing disability somewhat. And it's these two laws, the Rehab Act of '73 and the ADA, that are the basis of what we do in our field. So let's talk a little bit about what a disability is. So we have a graphic here of different common kinds of disability graphics. So somebody that's a wheelchair user and somebody with a dog and a stick and somebody with a prosthetic leg. And so the idea is these are visible disabilities. These are disabilities that we can see, but there are also disabilities that we can't see. Those are called invisible disabilities, and they're just as real and they're just as impactful, but they are sometimes more difficult to understand. So now that we have a protected class of people, we need to understand and define what that class is. So according to the Rehab Act of '73, a person is considered to have a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment, which substantially impacts one or more major life activity, have a record of such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. And the graphic that I have up here is a person, a double amputee, running, a very strong athlete running. So I want to pause here a little bit because that's a lot of the background and how we came to decide that this was an important information. Are there any questions?
Just as a reminder to all attendees, if you have any questions, please place them in the chat.
So the idea of being empowered, the idea of being a participant in a civil rights movement, the idea of being who you are, embracing positive identity, these are things that we had decided as we were teaching our faculty and our staff members and slowly making changes in the culture of our campus, that it was most important to bring these things to our students, right? For most of our students with disabilities, they spend a good amount of their lives being treated and viewing their disability through a medical model, meaning something's broken, something's wrong, something has to be remediated, something has to be fixed, as opposed to viewing disability as identity. This is part of who I am. I embrace who I am. I'm proud of who I am. So we started working toward that culture shift, and then spring 2020 hit. So, and this is a picture of the COVID virus. So what happened with spring 2020? So in March 2020, we had to pivot pretty quickly to a virtual learning environment. Now, we are a smaller campus. We're one of the smallest of the CSUs. We have a very diverse learning community here. So we were concerned about making sure that we continued to engage our students. So not only did we have COVID, we saw the rebirth of social justice activism, which really just energized our campus, our constituents, even though we weren't all together. So what do we do, right? Now we have all of these things happening in the world. We had started this program of engaging our students in this positive identity. How do we keep them engaged and growing? Well, one of the first things that we did was we really started doing a whole lot of outreach. We expanded our intrusive counseling. So if a student enrolled in our program, right, somebody signs up with us and they want accommodations, for ease in the past, they had a new student appointment, but there was a lot of virtual. They could just click, I need this accommodation in this class, this accommodation in that class. But now we were reaching out and going for follow-up meetings. How are you? Let's check in. How are you pivoting to the virtual environment? We were allowed to, this allowed us to really connect with our students on a more one-to-one human basis. Like, how's it going beyond your disability, beyond your accommodation? How are you adjusting to COVID? What's happening? And that allowed us to become more proactive and to really create more intentional programming that allowed us to keep our students engaged, but it also allowed us to keep an eye on those learning goals that we discussed to promote positive identity. So this is a logo created by our colleague at Sacramento State. It is a hand clenched, giving a power signal, a person in a wheelchair with a cape, the rainbow flag, as well as shades of black and brown. And this has really become emblematic for us of keeping social justice, keeping positive identity, empowering students, and understanding that we as professionals have a lot of work to do in the virtual environment. So what did we do as far as student engagement? So we were able to, again, create some strategic opportunities for virtual engagement. We knew we had to continue to make inroads to inclusion and equity if we were gonna keep our students up to date on what was going on, and if we were gonna remain relevant in their lives as they were now trying to keep their home lives going, being affected by COVID, being affected by the world around them. So we were able now through that programming to have our students build skills that are enabling them to become recognized as leaders, scholars, mentors, employees. These are all part of our identity, right? Nobody is any one thing. So we needed to make sure that our students were able to continue to build on this positive identity moving forward. And keeping students connected has been a large part of this. So for us, we have something here, a retention program in place where we are looking to keep our students engaged, retained, and getting toward degree completion in 4 years. And so we found that having the more intentional virtual programming that really spoke to our students where they were allowed us to make strides toward those retention goals and toward the degree completion. So I now am going to turn it over to Bonnie to talk a little bit about those support programs. But before I do, are there any questions?
So we have one question here. They'd like to know, someone would like to know where we can find the graphic that you're sharing.
The one from Sacramento State? The one with the wheelchair in the hand, the power fist?
Yes.
Okay. So that actually, believe it or not, that is something that we just all share around here. It was created at Sac State. If there is a way for me to share that with somebody at the convention, at the conference, I'd be more than happy to forward it.
Yeah, I think you can get in touch with Siobhan about that. I'm sure a lot of people would love to have that available. Because it is really cool.
It's really cool. It's powerful, and it kind of speaks to what a lot of our students and what we as a society are living through. So it's wonderful. I'll be more than happy to share. Bonnie?
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks so much. So I'm Bonnie Landau, and I'm the Transition and Retention Counselor here at Cal State Channel Islands in Disability Accommodations and Support Services. And so I help with developing the programming and running a lot of the programming, and I work directly with the students who receive accommodations on our campus. And so we're going to go through some of these programs that were born out of some of these changes that we've seen in the last year. And this slide here on the right, we have a poster that shows that it's the same picture of the W amputee running with prosthetics. It's a really impressive photo because he's so muscular and you can just see his strength. And so it says on the poster, "See the able, not the label." So we have these posters that we've been developing that are going to be putting in our offices when the students return in fall, and just another way to reinforce the disability as identity. So next slide, Michelle. So for us, we had our peer mentor program, one of the first programs we were looking at, peer mentor. So this is a program where we have students, sometimes they're students with disabilities and sometimes they are other students on campus. who mentor new students coming to our campus. They could be first-time freshmen or transfer students. And the whole idea of the peer program is to create a connection between the new students and somebody who has already been through the process at CI, and to just, give them the support they need to become acclimated to the school. And the mentors do one-on-one meetings each week, and the meetings might include, for example, touring them around campus and showing them, where to get all their paperwork filled out for registration or signing up for classes, or they may sit and talk to them about how to communicate with a professor. The mentors also work as teams to create presentations that all the mentees will attend. So when fall semester hit last year, we recognized the strength of this program and we grew it because we recognized that a lot of students, especially first-time freshmen coming into school, were going to be coming in a virtual environment. So there was a lot more to navigate, and it really required a lot more knowledge. So we grew our peer mentor program, and it was tremendously successful. And the students who went through it, they really felt connected and supported. And then the students who were mentors developed some really wonderful leadership skills. So, I see there's some questions there. Somebody asked, how are the mentors selected? So it is actually a paid position on our campus. And Michelle, why don't you talk to that? Because since you're in that process of choosing who the mentors are.
Sure. So we have an application process. It's a competitive process where we ask students why they want to be mentors, if they had ever had a mentor, what was a meaningful experience for them. And it's really important to understand also that we do see this as a multifaceted program. So we have the mentees, but the mentors are also required to have one-on-one meetings with staff and to learn firsthand leadership skills. So the idea here is that the mentees are now getting acclimated and connected to the community, to the campus community, and that the mentors are now also learning leadership skills. So these are students who are already acclimated to the campus and are showing potential for being leaders so that they can then move forward and bring their personal, what they've gone through, their experiences, and share that and help the next generation. So it's kind of nice that we're able to do this in a tiered position, in a tiered way, and we are able to pay those mentors.
Next slide. Thanks, Michelle. So when COVID hit, Michelle talked about doing this intrusive counseling model, which is basically a concept where you reach out to the student instead of waiting for them to come to you with challenges. So we increased that, checking in on our students because we all, kind of had to turn on a dime. And there was a lot of challenges with faculty trying to move into virtual classes. There was a lot of confusion. It was really an interesting time. So virtual school survival skills was born out of all the emails that I and my fellow counselor, we were getting all these emails from students. They were really struggling with a lot of issues. One of the biggest was, I can't study at home. I'm so distracted. And so the first workshop we did was how to, minimize distractions to focus on schoolwork. And then all the workshops we started doing were really in response to the needs of the students. And we just started doing it every week. And initially the purpose of it was to connect with the students, to create an environment where we say, we support you, and just, to have a way to keep reaching out to them. It was sort of like a covert intrusive counseling model because we kept sending them emails reminding them about events. So reminding them that we were here. But within a few weeks of starting this, it became really obvious that a lot of students were struggling, not just the students in the DOS program. And so we opened up the program campus-wide, and we started asking the students, where do you need support? What do you need help with? And we started creating workshops every single week. And you can see listed here some of the workshops we did last semester, optimizing your study space. Even talking about having a clear study space was important. Getting organized was a big one. And a lot of students in the virtual environment, something we recognized was that they were missing those moments in class, those mini conversations when you're walking into class and unpacking your stuff, saying, hey, did you get started on that assignment? Or hearing somebody say, oh, I did this and I had a really hard time. I'm glad I got started early. Or, I couldn't find this. Where did you find it? Did you have success? Those mini conversations were integral to keeping students organized. And now they were having to organize in a silo. Many students had no conversations with their fellow students. And so these workshops became a way where we could help those students build those skills. And it really took off, and we started having dozens of students. At one point, I think the biggest workshop we had about 36 students, I think, come. And then what was interesting is we record all these workshops, and we have a YouTube channel, which we could share the link if you want to see it. But some students didn't want to ask questions when we were recording. So we would turn it off at the end and say, okay, you can ask questions now, you're not being recorded. And all of a sudden at the end of the workshops, it became social hour. And in the social hour, the students started asking all kinds of questions about things that were going on in the school. And so, I think that was really key, because that is where we really saw the challenges that the students were having. And it also, students started to get to know each other. And some of them said, I'm just coming so they would come even late, like they might've had a class or something, or they didn't need the topic, but they would still come in late so that they could have that endpoint. And so this is an ongoing project. We will continue it even when we get back to in-person school, because we recognize students really need these extra support services, and it's a great way to connect with them. But because of that ending social hour, Michelle, go to the next slide.
Wait, if I could just add for 1 second that one, again, we were talking about like the unexpected things that happen as a result, right? So this made our department and students with disabilities visible, even virtually. It really added to our visibility, because this intrusive counseling model allowed us to connect with the students, again, on a real level beyond their disability. Like, what are you struggling with? And if you're struggling with this, I guarantee you somebody else is struggling with this. And when we opened it up to the community, we were seen as leaders, right? Our students, because this became very student driven. This was really about students with disabilities leading the way and saying, yeah, I can say it out loud. I'm struggling. And there was like respect that went along with that. So again, because of the social.
Yeah, and so then Diverse Dolphins was born. And so on our campus, we have clubs, which are student led, and then we have affinity groups, which are staff led. So Diverse Dolphins, our mascot at Cal State Channel Islands is a dolphin, because we are not on the Channel Islands. A lot of people ask us that. We're on mainland, but the Channel Islands are off the coast, and a lot of dolphins live in the water there. So that's our mascot. And so this affinity group basically is an opportunity for individuals with disabilities to come and socialize, and the people who support them can come with them. So the logo on the left is a design from the neurodiversity logo, which is the infinity sign, and it's usually colored in a rainbow. So this one is colored in a rainbow, but then part of the infinity sign goes up and it shows a dolphin leaping out of it. So it incorporates our mascot and the neurodiversity logo into one. And so this became a place where the students could just come and hang out. And probably the best thing we do with this group is we do virtual coffees or virtual lunches where there is no agenda. People just show up and talk about whatever is challenging them. And sometimes we'll have students come in and maybe they have a physical disability and they're getting through midterms and they're talking about how hard it is to pull themselves through this when they're so tired, or when their back is hurting and they can't sit up long enough to study, and they're trying to find other ways to study. And sometimes they just come in and talk about fun things like, you know, some goofy thing that their dog did the other day, or, you know, their latest achievement in running or something. And the other thing we do is sometimes we do more formal stuff like game night. So we do virtual scavenger hunts, or watching TV, or they've been talking about wanting to do an Among Us tournament. So I'm not a video gamer, so my son will have to sit in for me on that one. So the cool thing about Diverse Dolphins is it started with the staff saying, hey, these students need a social place to engage. But then we're transitioning it to student-led. What do they want to do? And then recently it moved into a social justice event. And Michelle, why don't you share about what we did that was so wonderful a few weeks ago?
So a few weeks ago, there was an unfortunate incident that happened at a local school that caused our entire community concern. And in response to our students who were talking about the event and wanted to know more about the school's reaction, we were able to host a Diverse Dolphins coffee with our university president, provost, and vice president for student affairs to come talk to our students directly. And it was wonderful because we had, again, about 36 students, some with disabilities, some allies of those students, just to come to talk about the issue of disability and about ableism and about paths forward for the school and roles that we could all play. So it was very empowering for our students. And I believe it was really, really moving for our faculty, for our leadership, to hear from the students directly, because there really is a big difference between what I say in the room when I'm in those meetings and hearing it directly from the students. It's very powerful. And I have to say that it really has impacted our function moving forward, that there are things that our upper leadership wants to do differently in response to hearing directly from our students. So what started off as just a social place to come hang out ended up having great impact on the campus moving forward.
Yeah, one of the cool things that came out of that is the VP of Student Affairs came to our last virtual coffee for Diverse Dolphins. So that was really cool.
Yeah, just to hang out.
Just to hang out.
Yeah.
It was really cool. It was really good. So another thing that we are so excited to launch this spring is a chapter of the the Delta Alpha Pi Honor Society. We're the Eta Zeta chapter. If you don't know about this honor society, it's specifically for students with disabilities. And what a wonderful way to recognize all the efforts that they put in, because despite all the accommodations and support, it's still harder to do school when you have a disability. And so we're so excited that this Friday, we're initiating our inaugural class of our chapter of Delta Alpha Pi at Delta Alpha Pi. And it's really great because this is not just to honor them and recognize all their hard work, but it's also an opportunity for those who participate to also participate in leadership opportunities. And recently on our campus, you know, they're doing orientation and they want to do a session with students with disabilities to talk to incoming students about what it's like to navigate CI with a disability. And so we reached out to our Honor Society students and said, would you like to participate? And then quite a few of them signed up to be on the panel. And so they are not only, you know, a student who has the grades to be in an Honor Society, but now they're going to have opportunities to share with others. And, you know, again, making students with disabilities more visible on campus to understand that they're just like everybody else.
And part of the pledge that they take, the pledge includes something about being a leader, being a visible mentor, being a visible student with disability on campus. And again, that really is very powerful for students who have spent so much of their lives being managed through that medical model I discussed earlier. So to have a panel of students to come speak to incoming students and say, yeah, I have a disability, but I'm successful and I'm happy, and you know, this one's going to be a teacher, and that one's going to be an architect, and that one's going to be an engineer, and you know, it's wonderful and it's empowering. And some of the feedback we received from the Honor Society students is that they would like to hear from professionals on the campus who have disabilities, so they could learn more about their personal journey. You know, just yes to you know, as a feel-good story, yes, but then to understand how moving forward they can manage their disability as part of who they are and still keep going, you know, and transition into the world of work. What does it mean? It's different in work and in school. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and this is open to any campus. So those of you who are working on different campuses, the national office is in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and they're wonderful. And so I highly suggest that you consider bringing a chapter to your university, to your campus.
Yeah. So with all of these new things that we're doing and, you know, expanding our intrusive counseling model, we also expanded how we connect with our students. So for the first time, Disability Accommodations and Support Services, SCI, has ventured into online marketing, and we have an Instagram page, and we use it to promote our events and talk about our staff. And basically it's a way to connect with students. Instagram is the most used platform on our campus. Your campus may be different. So if you're looking at doing that, I encourage you to find out what your students use the most. We also have regular emails where we share about upcoming events. And we have found that if you have an event like the virtual school series or virtual coffee, it's always great the morning of to send a reminder email and with the Zoom link. And so that's great to make sure that they know about it. We also found out when we're reaching out to students that if the counselors reach out, so when we send it from our personal work email, they're more likely to read it than if we send it from the general accommodations email. So my fellow counselor, you can see on the left are all the squares from our Instagram page, and you can see Ramon's picture up there. He and I split a list because we each take half the alphabet. And so we send out these email announcements to our students because they're more likely to open them. And then every time we meet with a student, we remind them about what's coming up. When we were in person, we would give them handouts for different pieces of information on campus. So now we do that virtually via email. So we make sure that they know. And, you know, with a social media presence on Instagram, it automatically posts it to Facebook. And I'm told if you tag another tag on Instagram, then they can easily share it as well. So, you know, the campus helps us with promoting events.
And it's interesting, you know, for us, this is one of the positive lessons from the past year. You know, we were initially hesitant to get onto social media. We weren't sure how that would work with our student population. But I have to say, it's been really successful. We're able to share with other campus partners all of our events, and we can share their events. And we have found that students really look at Instagram. They don't always read email, but they do look at Instagram. So it's been very successful. And you'll see also in the squares that we share that we have a theme. We have a color theme. You can see that the Diverse Dolphins has its own color theme, and it matters because students notice. So the online marketing, if you will, really does keep students engaged and aware because they know they can see the square and know what virtual school survival skills. They understand what that means and what that series is.
Great, thank you. So another thing that we've done is develop our career programs more. So it's really important that we're not just looking at what's happening at school, but what happens when they leave school. And there's a lot of opportunities out there to support students with disabilities. So one of the things that we do is, we've incorporated it now into the virtual skills series, is we have career prep workshops. So one of the most popular ones is Resume Day with Jake. Jake is a counselor in our career center at CI, and he actually works with the students. It's a working workshop where he talks about what's important in a resume, but then he actually will look at their resumes and help improve it. And they also do, for example, this week at CI, they're having a career and internship fair. And last week they did a workshop on how to prep for that. They also do workshops on how to look for jobs and internships. So it's a great way to connect with other departments on campus, because the more we connect, the more awareness we raise, but also to really support the students in thinking what comes next, what comes when you graduate, or even over the summer. The other program that we work with is the Workforce Recruitment Program. And this is a federal program that students with disabilities can apply for. And basically how it works is a student actually applies and tells them about their area of interest. And then if a job comes up, they call them for an interview. So the jobs aren't there, they apply and become part of the database, and then they're called. So we have had students who have gotten hired through this program. And this is sponsored by the Department of Labor and Department of Defense. And these are for civilian jobs.
It's a very competitive program, by the way. So students really are required to apply, to interview. They get feedback on their performance. And we do have, they have internships, they have permanent jobs, they have overseas jobs. So we have a former student who's now living in Europe, fully employed based on an experience in this program. So it's a great program, and it's great experience for our students as well.
So Department of Rehabilitation, and, which in your state it might be called a vocational rehab, but in California they call it Department of Rehabilitation. So this is a resource that so many students don't know about, and it's such a fabulous resource for them. The Department of Rehab, their whole goal is to help a person with a disability to get employed. And what happened on our campus, they created an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that allows the Department of Rehabilitation counselors to come onto campus and work with the students. Well, when we went virtual, that was, how are we going to do that? And we created another avenue of connection with the students by having virtual information workshops about Department of Rehab, so they could learn about it. And then we help with scheduling appointments with the counselors and making sure that the links are given to the students. So we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it virtually. And we also are making sure every time we meet with a new student, part of our new student orientation with them is, are you signed up with Department of Rehab? And if not, we discuss it with them and get them on a calendar to make an appointment. And we find that students who do this, they come back and say, thank you so much, because the Department of Rehab, you know, it will help them think about career choices, and when they're ready to apply for jobs, developing that resume, practicing interview skills, you know, and once they get hired, how to have that conversation about, I might need an accommodation at work, or even they provide support like coaching, job coaching. And sometimes, depending on the disability, they even cover expenses for college. So if that's part of the student's career path. So this is a really wonderful resource. And, you know, we're continuing to develop our career programs because we feel like it really supports the long-term goal of the students. Michelle, did you have anything to add about the career programs?
Yeah, just that it's really important as we look again toward growing our students, that we need to look past their university experience, that we want students to be confident, that we want them to develop leadership skills, we want them to develop competency in their fields of study, but we also have to help them look for jobs, know how to look for jobs, know how to consider career. And for our students, disability really factors in. So through all of these programs, there is also a discussion of, do I disclose a disability? Is one of the questions we get quite often. How do I disclose? When do I disclose? So again, just kind of normalizing, like, this is who I am. This may or may not be part of, you know, my career path. Does it fit in? Can I get support? How do I continue to move forward in a positive way? So for us, we look at, again, the peer, the transition in to education, then they're here and we have our support programs while they're with us. And then from my perspective, when we look at our career programming, it's support as they transition on after us, right? So it's really the full life cycle, if you will, the higher ed life cycle of the student that we want to support. I believe that's it. So questions, we have about what, a few minutes left for questions?
Yes, we have just about like 3-4 minutes left. So a couple of questions have come in. First, we do have a few people who would like to know if you will share the PowerPoint with the attendees. So you can go ahead and send that to Siobhan, and we'll make sure it's sent out to everybody who signed up. We also have some people who have asked to share the YouTube channel.
I will get that link and share it in the comments.
Okay, great. We have one question here. How did you reach out to gather the common challenges? Did you use open-ended surveys or focus groups or something like that?
So combination. So as Bonnie said, we have found, and Bonnie, please feel free to chime in, we have found that our students really respond better to the emails that come from their own counselor. Because when we pivoted right to virtual, a lot of communication went out from the university. So the university in general had what we call EchoBot, right? They were going and sending surveys and all of that. The counselors were really doing email outreach more pinpointed, like, hey, Jane Doe, or like, hey, Jane, how are you? And that's where we got the greater response. When it was, hey, it's Bonnie, or hey, it's Ramon, how you doing? Bonnie, you want to add to that?
Well, I think one of the most important things is reaching out to your students when there's nothing, quote unquote, wrong. And that's the whole concept behind the intrusive counseling model, is that you're reaching out and saying, hey, how are you? How are things going? And so in creating discussions when things are calm, when things are stressful, they're more apt to reach back out to you and ask you for help. And we're really seeing that. We track our emails, and we've seen an increase in emails and students asking for support. So it's basically creating rapport in doing that. And, I sent out an email yesterday to remind them we're doing a workshop tomorrow. And oh my gosh, it was like right away I had students replying, I can't come, but thanks for the reminder. They don't even need me, and they're replying.
And we found again that was like a really big deal in moving from that new student appointment and then go online and elect what accommodations you need, your approved accommodations for whatever class, to that second appointment where we were just coming in. And really the whole point of that second appointment was just, hey, how you doing? Do you have any questions? Were you able to sign up for your accommodations? And because there was like no stress in that second appointment, there was a lot more connection. So we find that when that connection is made initially, it just follows through. So we were acting actually more as social workers at a certain point over the pandemic, where students were reaching out to us for all different kinds of issues, not having to do with accommodations in the classroom, because they had a connection with somebody and they trusted that person, and that was their resource.
All right. Okay. Unfortunately, I know there are still some questions coming in, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Okay, so we have some time here. So a question here with the posters you're creating, can you share the process for creating the posters? How are you achieving visibility versus creating, inspiration porn?
Great question. But with this, the students are engaged in the process of creating the posters, and those are brand new, and we're just in the process of doing it. So we haven't actually got to the point where we've gotten full feedback from the students, but it is with the students' input that we're creating it.
So it goes back to that saying, nothing about me without me. So when we do, to me, inspiration porn is really like, hold it, like, oh, look how wonderful, look at the achievement, as opposed to, this is what I've done. And like, I want to be a role model. There's an empowerment to the students saying, this is how we're going to flip the frame. This is how I want to be seen. So I think having that student input, it makes all of the difference in this process. And that's what we've seen so far. You know, again, we're at the very beginning, but that's what we've seen so far.
I would wholeheartly agree. So I think that just about wraps it up for us. I just want to say, Michelle, Bonnie, on behalf of the committee, and I'm sure in part on behalf of many of the attendees here, we think what you're doing out there is amazing. This is a very informative presentation. Thank you for giving this to us, to our attendees. Thank you for attending. We'd ask you to please join us at 2 o'clock for our next presentation, The Next Normal: Reflections, Insights, and Preparation for the Year Ahead. You can use the same link that you used to join this session to join that one. Once again, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again very soon.
Bye.